finally, one of the biggest showdowns of the intellectual marketplace that we've all been waiting for. Richard Wolff versus Destiny. Duke it out. Capitalism versus Socialism. And you know what? I'm ready for it, all right? I'm ready for it. Let's see what happens. We're going to be watching on the serfs end. I know some people were thinking about, they were watching on Rational National's end. Let's watch on the serfs, because we love the serfs. Lance shouted us. If you guys didn't know, Lance actually shouted us out once. It was super cool. Really, really epic of him. We love that. All right, let's go.
Hello, Professor. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, this is too fast. Sorry. 1.25. Let's go.
I guess we're just waiting for Steven, and we'll get started.
Okay.
Hey, Steven.
How's it going?
Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Awesome. Oh, this worked out perfectly. First try. All right, everybody. I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and then I'll lay out the rules, and I'll give some shout-outs, some quick background to everything, and then we'll get started. Does that sound good?
Fine.
All right.
I don't see you, Lance.
You'll just be hearing me if that's all right.
Okay. No, I just wanted to check.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, everybody.
If Steve is wearing a blue shirt, then I see him.
Yep, that's me. That's the blue shirt. Yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
It's Steve.
Okay, welcome
Nebraska
guys, gals,
Steve.
and MPals to what is being described as the biggest event in the history of the terminally online. The great debate will shortly commence between two titans in their respective fields. We'd like to first and foremost thank Democracy at Work, as well as Economic Update for helping us schedule and book the good professor, and Destiny and his community for participating as well. We'd also like to thank the Rational National, who is hosting the event on YouTube for those afraid of the Twitch platform. And finally, Politics.gg Discord, where they are hosting the debate of the debate because the internet is constantly trying to out-meta itself. The rules are very simple. Both participants have agreed to approach this conversation in the best of faith. We'll be giving 3-minute opening statements in which they will both give defense of their arguments. This will be followed by a girthy hour-long open forum between the two of them, followed by a 20 to 30-minute audience Q&A, and finally closing statements. If you'd like to participate in any point in the audience Q&A, please head over to twitch.tv/theserfstv and hit !debate in the chat. There will be a link to a form you can fill out that will be made available. While donations are always appreciated, please be aware donating does not mean that your questions will be read. The only way to participate in the Q&A is going through the Google Doc form that we have provided. Finally, we will ask that everyone in everyone's respective chats please avoid the use of anything that would either violate Twitch or YouTube's terms of service. Keep the discussion to being as productive and as lightning as only the internet knows how to do. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's competitors. Arguing in favor of socialism is Richard
he's
Wolff,
gone.
Professor of Economics, who's previously taught at Yale and is also the host of Economic Update as well as Democracy at Work. He's authored several books on both Marxism and socialism, as well as a recent one covering the COVID epidemic called The Sickness is the System. Arguing in favor of capitalism is Stephen Bunnell II, known under the pseudonym Destiny. He began as a professional StarCraft 2 player and went on to revolutionize politics on the Twitch streaming platform. He's gone on to debate many of the largest public figures on both the right and left corners of the political spectrum. Recently, he's become involved in campaigning for local politicians, and while his detractors on both sides have labeled him either a communist or a fascist, he prefers the moniker as the omni-liberal. Both contestants prefer he/him pronouns. Thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, since he's arguing for a change to the current paradigm, we will begin with you, Professor Richard Wolff.
Okay, in the 3 minutes I have, I cannot speak as fast as you just did, so I won't even try. I'll try to make a couple of basic points. Every economic system in the history of the world displays the following pattern. It is born, it evolves over time, and then it dies and passes away, giving way to another one. And part of that process has always been the conviction of the people in each economic system that sooner or later they can, they should, and they will do better, overcome some of the problems and difficulties they're facing, and organize a system that better meets human needs. The process is sometimes relatively smooth, other times it's rocky. That varies with the conditions and particularly with the level of resistance from those who don't want to see the system change and shift. Capitalism, in my judgment, has been born, most would agree, has evolved over the last 3 centuries or so, and is now at that last stage. The only question now is exactly how and when the passing occurs. Likewise, in my judgment, the yearning for something better has built up in capitalism to a pretty intense level now. Whether you look at the debts of students, whether you look at the mind-bending inequality that this system generates over and over again, unless and until it is revolted against by masses of people who do something about the inequality, only to discover that as long as capitalism remains, the tendency to inequality resumes.
Wait a second. All right. Pause. While I was searching around while listening to Wolff, I think Wolff, they haven't really started arguing yet, but quick little update. Mike from PA is now trying to get into a duel with Sock Done Left over this debate right now, and obviously Merrick top post, number one SDL defender. I think she describes herself as. But yeah, I guess we'll see how that goes. Ooh, baby.
I think people are also tired of the instability. Every 4 to 7 years, capitalism crashes. We've had 3 in this new century in its 20 years. Yep, right on schedule, every 4 to 7 years. Millions lose their jobs. Businesses go belly up. Cities and towns can't get the revenue they need to provide the services we depend on. One sign of the exhaustion of this system, a level of money creation, a level of debt creation we have never seen. Government debt, corporate debt, personal debt. The system is exhausted, and the entire private enterprise system is now on 24/7 government life support. I think it's over. I think that's difficult for us all to live through, and we better learn some lessons from the British Empire, from which they have been tumbling for a century. We could and should do better on the downswing than the British have been able to. And the more we talk about it and discuss it and explore it, the better our chances to make another progressive transition to a better system that we all need and will benefit from.
Okay, Destiny?
Okay, I mean, that's cool. I really wish he would have given like a nice and simple, sort of concise definition that we could all stick on, like something that we can just hang on. Like people who may not be too into socialism or any of these certain topics. I really feel like he could have hammered in on that, like a really simple thing people can just be like, okay, oh, that's what it is, in a way that makes sense to a lot of people. Now, he's a professor. He may be used to just doing lectures. I feel like this may be a tiny bit lectury, but I guess we'll get into that. We'll see how that goes.
Oof, are you keeping us on a timer?
I am.
All right. As of March 2021, Americans rank the economy, job markets, the handling of the coronavirus, and leadership in Washington as the 4 most important challenges facing our country. Socialist policies would not alleviate any of these concerns. Countries have tried the socialist experiment. Time and time again, this has failed. Doctors in Cuba moonlight as taxi drivers. Countries with socialized healthcare haven't fared much better than the U.S. in their handling of the coronavirus. And any socialist regime will necessarily involve the bureaucracy of Washington even more heavily in our economy. Any country that has attempted to realize a fully socialist economy has either failed completely, such as in the case of the USSR, destroyed large swaths of their economy, such as in Venezuela, or been forced to embrace more neoliberal economic policies to realize true growth in their economy, such as in China or Vietnam. Liberal market policies work better in both theory and practice when it comes to efficiently allocating resources to maximizing the economic productivity of any country, and we've seen this play out time and time again across a wide variety of markets and countries throughout history across the globe. Oftentimes, people like Richard Wolff will bring up the boom-bust cycle as though it's an inherent flaw of capitalism, but I believe I speak for most when I say that a boom-bust cycle is preferable to just going bust, as so many socialist countries have. It's also important for us to realize that no economic organization is in and of itself inherently moral or immoral, but rather we ought to view them as tools to effect some greater output for our country that we can later utilize and distribute in the most fair manner with government policy to most of our citizens as we see fit, creating a bigger pie, so to speak, from which all of us can eat. Morality and justice should exist in the realm of government policy. We cannot allow it to blind us to the economic realities surrounding us. No matter how much we wish a wild lion not to eat us, our desire alone will never satiate its appetite. While socialism may sound good in theory, the destruction it would wrought on the wealth of our country and the oppressive restrictions it would place on our businesses would not help the vast majority of Americans. It'd be foolish to enforce protectionist or socialist policies on our economy while major developing economies, such as India and China, are moving in the exact opposite direction, having realized time and time again the failures in socialist planning. Socialism implies two major things: a change in both the means and mode of production. The means of production change in such a way to completely disallow private investment or ownership, and a change in the mode of production such that we no longer produce goods and services for a profit. Instead, businesses are only started with the approval of some governmental body, some kind of central planning, with the equal decision-making and management of every worker, and the goods and services produced in any society are what some government body dictates, irrespective of market forces or the wants and desires of the citizens. It's likely in the course of this debate that my opponent will suggest we take after Nordic or Western European countries, citing that things like socialized healthcare or subsidized education are powerful programs that address many of the underserved needs of Americans today. While this is true, I would like to remind everyone that we've spent the last decade reminding conservatives that the government simply providing welfare has absolutely nothing to do with socialism. My opponent believes that strong social safety nets and welfare programs are important parts of the government. Most liberals who welcome him with open arms, me included. Consequently, there are 5 major hurdles that no socialist I've ever spoken to has adequately addressed, and they are as follows. Number 1, what level of violence is acceptable for you to reach our socialist state? Number 2, how do we decide which businesses are allowed to exist in a socialist society without allowing private capital investment? 3, is any form of investment whatsoever allowed in a socialist society for an expansion of business? 4, how are labor markets determined in a socialist society? And 5, how do we calculate which goods and services a nation needs if we do away with the commodity form? Those are my 5.
Cool. All right, so we're going to do the open format now for the next hour. I don't think I'm going to need to moderate too much. As long as both of you just say something and allow the other person to speak and don't talk over each other, it should be fine. So
So I saw a little bit of this, and it seemed like they were talking over each other a bit, and I did not hear Lance. So I guess we're just gonna see. We're just gonna see how that goes. All right. So the 5 point. I want to see how Richard Wolff tackles these 5 points. Not a single socialist in the history of time has ever been able to overcome. I guess I don't know. We'll see. I don't know how much. When it comes to like a violence, right? We've been talking a lot about violence on in the discourse a little bit. I know in the very least like the last couple of days, but especially when talking about tankies and stuff, level of violence has been a really big reoccurring sort of thing when it comes to like overhauling an entire system. I mean, and I know lots of people bring up the fact of specifically like things like primitive accumulation and the in inherent violence of the state. But I'd like to see how he tackles this and the other questions as well. Oh boy.
I guess begin now.
Where do you want to start?
Well, can I respond to what was said?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. Yeah.
Okay. I find this a laughable caricature of anything I've ever written or anything that I understand is part of this conversation. And I don't appreciate being told what I think or what I say or what I mean or what I intend. I can speak for myself, and that would just be fine if we could allow each other to do that. Number one. Number two, I have no idea what this silly remark that I hear so often is, that no socialist society has succeeded at anything. I have no idea what you're talking about. Let me give you an example. One of the most important metrics used in the economics profession around the world to assess the quote unquote success of an economic system is the rate of economic growth. You measure GDP and you look at how it grows over time. And then you compare one country to another to assess their relative success, not as societies, because that's a vague generality, but at this particular metric, which we use in economics to measure economic growth over time. It's not the only metric, but it's a widely used one. So I'm now going to use it. In the 20th century, the fastest growing metric, the fastest growing GDP in any country measured was the Soviet Union. And in the 21st century we're living in, the fastest growing GDP in the world has been the People's Republic of China. This is not an endorsement of one or another economic system. It's a statement of fact verified by any reliable source of information.
Okay, I think Destiny's retort would be here is that China wasn't producing as much before they introduced some more like neoliberal sort of like capitalist forces into the market. Before it was like really sort of government driven, how lots of people would imagine like a socialist country would run. So I want to see how he tackle that, because I already know Destiny. I already know for a fact that's what Destiny's writing. That's exactly what he's writing right now.
When the project in the University of California, Berkeley, and others who keep track of this. So this has to be understood, because in much of the world, economic growth is a shared objective and goal that these two societies have excelled at achieving. Number one. Number two, when it comes to socialism, it would be useful if we all understood what the word means rather than playing around with caricatures. For example, the notion that socialism is all about what the government does has been contested throughout the history of socialism. And that idea is less dominant within the socialist tradition now than it ever was over the last 150 years.
It's when the government does stuff, we all know that.
Today, one of the most important issues for socialists has to do not with government regulation, not with government owning and operating businesses, not with these bugaboos of bureaucracy and all the rest of it, but has to do with an objective of transforming the organization of production in a factory, in an office, in a store, not to have a small group of people, the owner, the board of directors, the tiny little minority at the top that is a dictatorial power inside an enterprise, making all the key decisions that the employees have to live with, even though the minority making those decisions is not accountable to those employees. That's a socialism of transformation at the micro level, about which very little could have been discerned in the comments preceding these. If we're going to talk about socialism, then we have to talk about what it means to the people pushing for it and urging it. And those people have learned from the 20th and 21st century, just like those who pushed for capitalism 3 centuries ago learned from their early experiments how to refine, how to adjust, and how to change. To pretend that that didn't happen, to trade in old and shrinking conceptions of socialism may be good debating ploy, but it doesn't advance our understanding of anything.
Oh yeah. Also, one thing, how much violence, well, let's say we're back in the days like before like the Magna Carta, how much violence would is acceptable to overthrow something like a dictatorship or like a monarchy to establish democracy? How much violence would be there? Because Destiny would always ask the socialists about like what sort of violence would be useful there. And in that situation, what violence could like the people use? That genuine question, because then the question would not be like the violence, but like what would be have to happen to the society for them to do the violence, right? And I would be really interested because I remember when Destiny was talking to the Quartering, when he brought up, because the Quartering wanted to like try and debate Destiny on, I think mind me, I mean, check me if I'm misquoting him, but if I remember correctly, he said that it would not be unreasonable for people like immigrants or people on like DACA to use violence against conservatives trying to deport them to the from the country, a country that they had no part illegally coming to. They had no part in choosing. They came here as children with their parents, and this is the only country they know. They probably sometimes they don't even know Spanish. They don't know anything about the country that they may have come from like Central or South America. And they're just going to be dropped at the border with nothing, which could, for lots of them, just be straight up a death sentence. He said it was possible. It is not morally unethical for, it is not immoral for people to use violence then. So I'd like to know. I'm not sure if Wolff's going to hit him on that, but I'd like to know what his answer would be there.
Okay, if you want to be easier to have more of a back and forth rather than the super long monologues each, so we can respond to each other more, if you're okay with that. Just for a couple of things that you said. So I'm trying not to miss.
I just talk slower than you.
Oh yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. My understanding is that in the 20th century there was a faster growing economy than the USSR, and it was Japan. Japan still exists today, and the USSR does not. I understand that the USSR did show a huge amount of growth, but I think it's odd to use that as an example when socialists often point to the evils of imperialism.
When was he
Lower than you?
Oh yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. My understanding is that in the 20th century there was a faster growing economy than the USSR, and it was Japan.
Was Japan growing really fast? Wasn't Japan growing really fast because they got out of the monarchy, the emperorship, the monarchy, and they got bombed with nuclear bombs twice, and were basically like held by the US and was like built up. Especially the U.S. had a massive stake in Japan, because we could Israel it basically, making it into like a giant military base, kind of like what we did with South Korea. So obviously we had a really big investment. Yeah, the U.S. funded their whole construction. Yeah, that's not really. I'm not sure if Japan's growth was necessarily a really sort of natural sort of thing. Japan has a worse debt to GDP ratio. I would imagine that. Yeah, the Marshall Plan. Yeah. So I'm not really sure if that's apples to oranges right there.
Still exists today, and the USSR does not. I understand that the USSR did show a huge amount of growth, but I think it's odd to use that as an example when socialists often point to the evils of imperialism, and when you point out the fact that everybody was heavily industrializing around that time as well. I don't think it's fair to say that the USSR simply grew on the merits of socialism when there were so many other things happening at the time, and when it was outgrown by another economy that was.
Those are the facts. I mean, you can play whatever games you want. The fact of the matter is that the Soviet Union's performance in the 20th century completely outshines that of Japan. There's no comparison. In 1917, when the Soviet Union begins, it is the poorest country in Europe by far. It then goes through 70 years of a lost World War I, of a civil war, of an agricultural collectivization, and of World War II, which did more damage in Russia than in any other country. Notwithstanding that it was the poorest country at the beginning of this horrific story. It ends up in 1965 being the #1 competitor of the United States for global hegemony. That's only because of its #1 status in economic growth that it achieved the overcoming of all those horrific losses. I'm not arguing in favor of this or that about the Soviet Union, but the fact of its achievement is a staggering reality that you can dance around from here to tomorrow, but it doesn't go away because it's inconvenient to confront it. And the same thing is true now. If you read Pearl Buck's novels about China before the revolution, you will hear about a society.
Oh yeah, also Dar Keeves and Keep Educated. Thank you so much for the follows, both of you, for joining the frenzy and being so incredibly pog. I appreciate you. Sorry I didn't shout you out when you were here, but I appreciate both of you. Thank you.
Whose depth of poverty literally blows your mind. And here they are about to surpass the United States before the end of this decade. And that was accomplished by a communist revolution and a government that has been run by a communist party to this day. And yeah, for sure, they cleverly opened their society up to capitalists to come and join them. But to imagine that the achievement of the Chinese economy is purely due to the private capitalists rather than to the state economy, that's making believe, because you need to have an argument that puts the success at the credit of one or the other. The infrastructure, the training of the mass of people, everything that happened in China.
Hey, Johnny V. Mills. And I ice cream salad. Thank you both for the follows, for joining the frenzy, being so pog. You're also pog. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Based on what?
Is as much a product of the planning and policies of the communist government than of any other factor. And that.
I mean, well, we don't really advocate for socialism, communism being when the government does stuff. You cannot look past the success that the Chinese government has had in its control of its economy. The sort of what they can do without any sort of, what they can do without a lot of input from the sort of like wishes of like the general populace a lot of the time. Let's be completely honest. They can do it. They can do a whole lot. Hey, listen, they tell people to stay inside. They just stay inside, period. There's nothing that they can really do about it. They tell people this is it. That's it. That's kind of like, that's just kind of it. They tell people that we build here and then they build there. I mean, they pay them for that. And there's a lot of like cultural things that go into that, but They do a whole lot. They were able to get COVID under control a whole lot because the government has just so much control over the population. And I mean, like, we don't want to say that just having control of the population necessarily is good. I mean, we can look at Xinjiang. It's not really necessarily the best memes going on in China. Let's be completely honest. But they make a lot of things work. And yes, they had to integrate a little bit of capitalist regression, I don't know, back into their economy to get like a lot of boost. The amount that the Chinese government has in the economy is not insurmountable. Honestly, like it really isn't. And one big thing here is like we love the whole democracy thing, and that's great, right? But the same power that the Chinese government has, they can do some things that that we couldn't do on the same time frame. China can think in like decades, maybe even like 100 years into the future, where we can't really, because we change. I mean, technically, we change every 2 years. The House of Representatives will probably flip literally every 2 years. The Senate will probably flip every 4 years, and the presidency will probably flip every 4 to 8 years. And these people, Democrats and Republicans, have almost completely opposite worldviews. So always like swinging back and forth when it comes to a lot of these projects, and we can barely have any projects run for longer than sometimes 4 years. So yeah.
Has to be recognized as well. And none of this is an endorsement. That society has strengths and weaknesses. It has things we can criticize, but we can't make it up because it's inconvenient to face the successes they've had and continue to have.
Okay, so I'm not saying that the USSR did not grow a lot. Obviously, the USSR grew massively. Your claim is not that the USSR grew. That's not what we're arguing about. It's whether or not the USSR grew at the rate that it did.
Tanky arc democracies cringe woo. Yeah, there you go. You're welcome. I did it. What if instead of having a government, we just let Walmart run the country? You know, they're so good at business. They'll just take us into the business stratosphere. What if we have a billionaire as president? You know, billionaires, they're really good at like managing money and stuff. That's the only reason why they're billionaires. So maybe if we just have a billionaire run the country, then replace every single congressperson with a billionaire. There's enough of them, right? And then just have them, do Elon Musk, and then we'll do maybe instead of like fixing climate change or anything, to fix like rising sea levels, what Elon Musk will do is he'll just like have us dig under the US, just dig like a bunch of tunnels, and then we'll put like some hydraulics, okay, under the continental United States, and then when the sea levels rise from global warming, we just push America up. America just go up, okay? So then we won't have to worry about like our cities going underwater because we up. Elon Musk, he's so smart. He's like the real life Tony Stark.
Due to socialism, a country that was heavily involved in multiple famines, a country that heavily went from little industrialization to a lot of industrialization, and a country that engaged in a lot of imperialistic practices, is a country that grew massively in the 20th century. To say that all of their growth, or even the majority of their growth, was due to the organization of their economy and not due to factors that were independent of that organization, to say otherwise that they wouldn't have grown, maybe at an even faster rate had they been a capitalist economy, there would have to be some evidence provided for that. And I don't believe that that's ever been adequately demonstrated. On the contrary, I believe some people have argued that Russia could have potentially grown, the USSR could have potentially grown even faster had it abandoned some of its more outdated forms of trying to manage their economy. When we bring up China has grown a lot under certain socialist policies for sure. When we look at China, especially in the 80s and 90s, China began opening itself up to massive growth when it comes to foreign investment. China is the number 2 country in the world that allows for foreign direct investment. And the coalescing of all of China's state-owned, the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises, into a select few industries, and then the massive opening of foreign investment into that country to give other people more control over privately owned businesses has been what has caused the massive explosion that we've seen of China in terms of pulling people out of global poverty, as you mentioned in the video that you did for the Gravel Institute. You attribute that to socialist policies, but the thing that really pulled China into the 21st century in terms of economic success was the opening itself up to foreign direct investment, was the opening itself up to other economies being able to interact with them more, which are all neoliberal trade policies. These aren't people-owned businesses. These aren't businesses that are ran by the workers. These are, I mean, if anything, China is a government that runs the business itself. It's a state capitalist economy more so than any type of socialist or communist economy. To say that a single party regime is having the workers themselves making decisions over how any individual business is running, I don't think is fair to say.
It's a little difficult to hold. It's really difficult to hold China up as like a lot of like really big socialist success. I will say that it is hard to do that because, listen, I'm not sure how big of a role the people play in who's actually running the country. I mean, let's be completely honest. And like the great Richard Wolff clip says, socialism is actually not when the government does stuff. It really isn't. I want to see how Richard Wolff tackles this foreign investment. I'd like to see that.
I guess one
really,
and then real quick, just finishing.
Your understanding of China, your understanding of China though is really badly flawed.
Can I finish?
Lance?
Just this last part. The thing that confuses me the most, and the thing that frustrates me the most, I guess, when I have discussions with socialists, is socialism feels like this very amorphous, ever transforming idea of what it actually is, such that I don't even know why we use the word anymore. So I'm very glad that you've acknowledged that Marx, in through his labor theory value analysis, was absolutely flawed and was an absolute failure. I'm glad that you've acknowledged that the way of analyzing. I have not acknowledged.
You're making this stuff up. I've never acknowledged anything of the sort.
Okay, well,
I don't even know where you get this.
Well, earlier you just said that we shouldn't hold ourselves captive to the thinking of thinkers in the 19th century in terms of what socialism is. So I assume you evolved.
No, I didn't do that at all. I told you that socialism has a variety of theories within it. It's a broad tradition. It had to be. In the 150 years since Marx wrote, his ideas have moved into every country on this earth at different levels of economic and cultural and political life. And of course, those different people all found something valuable, but they all made their own interpretations. This is a rich, diverse tradition. It's as if you're going to decide what it is.
Okay, so yeah, all right. So I guess Wolff's just he's going to argue that it's hard to just pin down. It is really hard to pin down socialism. Every time socialism moves to another country, it moves to like every single country, it sort of pops up different sort of ideals. People kind of like run with it and do their own thing. It has like the same sort of like common values, which would be like decommodification of the economy, and workers' ownership of the means of production. Like those two things are pretty fundamental to like most every single like socialist value. Those are the basically two things that you can possibly run with. There, I feel like Wolff did bad in this debate. It was kind of like I would imagine just from what we've seen so far is going to be kind of like a lecture sort of thing.
I mean, when I say these things, I never said that the Marxist theory isn't valuable, that the labor theory of value doesn't apply. If you read any of the books and articles I've pumped out in my life, you know that the exact opposite is the case. And I want to correct something. Wait a minute. I want to correct something about China because you keep.
Okay, so is he what is he trying to say here? I really want to get this down. What is he necessarily trying to say here? I guess that what he was really wants to mean is that we shouldn't just the only thing that we should possibly derive all of our ideas of socialism, it shouldn't be from like books that dusty old ass books from the 1800s that anti-Semitic white dudes in like Austria wrote, right? For their time and place, right? Socialism for them was something different in their time and place. We're not in their time and place anymore, okay? So I would imagine that's what he means, but I guess we'll get into that.
Repeating it. You know why private enterprise and private capital flows into China in the 80s and 90s?
Why though?
Because China had transformed itself from a place where nobody wanted to invest to a place like now where everybody does. Capitalist enterprises went there because they had a well-educated, disciplined labor force at very low wages, because they had built an extraordinary infrastructure, because you had a growing level of income for people to buy things. That's why General Motors produces and sells more cars in China than it does in the United States. The reason private capital went there was because they had, before the arrival, created the institutions. Every other part of the so-called third world, Asia, Africa, Latin America, who had received since the Second World War massive amounts of foreign aid, were desperately trying to do what the Chinese were doing, namely develop their countries so that foreign private investment would come. China didn't get any foreign aid because they were communists, and the United.
Also, yeah, it's really hard to live right now, especially with America, with trying to topple literally every single communist attempts at an uprising in their country, or like communistic movements or socialistic movements in their country, trying to topple literally all of them. It was really hard in the 1800s, really hard in the 1900s, and it's still hard today for lots of those economies too, because I mean the likelihood of you being blockaded, for you being sanctioned with America's like immense power is really hard. It's really hard to go anywhere. I wouldn't put that any worse on. I wouldn't put the blame on that any worse than those countries, or like Cuba as well, like China as well, or the USSR. I wouldn't put any blame on those countries. I wouldn't put any more blame on those countries than I would like African countries when imperialist Europe came down to just fucking destroy them, right? I don't think it was necessarily the massive failure of the African way of life that made the Trans-Pacific slave trade, you know. So that was a big problem there.
The United States didn't give them any, but they did a better job than all the countries who did get it, in order to get to the point of economic development where it became interesting for capitalists in Japan and
oh my gosh, Secret Melina sneaking into the frame.
Europe to go there. You need to pretend, for reasons I do not understand, that all of the achievements I've just described didn't happen, that somehow they don't deserve the credit. Look, in the world of economics, perhaps you're not familiar, we do exactly what you just said we oughtn't to do. We look at societies and say, they have a capitalist economic system, how did they do? And they have a socialist system with the different meanings of that term, and how did they do?
Wolff isn't a debate bro. He actually studies and reads theory and evidence, not rhetoric. Well, one thing, all right, rhetoric is one of the most important ways to change people's minds. If I remember correctly, there was a study that like came out that that said that when people are presented just straight up with like facts that disagree with them, then they'll like sink even harder into themselves and disbelieve those facts that they were provided that are contrary to their worldview even more. You have to be really good. Socialism is all about appealing to normal working class people. Those are the people that run the country. Those are the people that they do the things. They do the thing. Without them, the country would not be there. There would be no business. There would be no production. Without those people, this system was designed to be able to appeal to those people. If you don't know how to accurately give that to people in a way that they can understand and chew over, then it's kind of hard to say that you're really doing that well, honestly. And I'm not even saying that Wolff's necessarily doing bad here, but when you like walk up to it reminds me of this like Onion article of this fucking coal miner reading off fucking like feminist theory. You know, it just sounds super weird, and it looks like it doesn't belong there. Not because he's like stupid and there's no possible way that he could be like graduate school like gender studies educated or anything, but it's because those terms aren't really used by normal working class sorts of people. It just really being able to explain these topics in a way that you can go home and talk to someone at home or in your workplace, at the water fountain, at the at the cooler in your cubicles, while you're walking to work, while you're going to lunch, at the bar, with these sorts of things that you can just talk to people about. It's really the rhetoric is extremely important. If you want anyone to prove that to you, you can look at Donald J. fucking Trump. Okay, man had zero policy. Man had zero real prescriptions about the world. Man had zero intellect, but he ran entirely on rhetoric. And he transformed the Republican Party in a span of less than 4 years. Now, obviously, there are lots of things that he already believed there, but honestly, lots of socialist ideals. You really, I think the working class can really vibe with, for lacking a better term. I think that's true as well. But yeah, the little rant. Rhetoric is extremely important. That's one of the only real ways that you drop the fucking Das Kapital, all right, on the lap of some like coal miner. Okay, please tell you let's check back up on him in 3 months to see if he's a socialist now. He probably hasn't even fucking opened it, or he did open it, saw all the words, and then closed it back again. But yeah, like rhetoric is really important. It's not the only thing you should have. Obviously, you don't want to end up like the right. That's only rhetoric, but it is extremely important. You want mass appeal, absolutely.
And then we say they're different and part, not all, part of the story is the difference.
I took a little time talking. Let's rewind a little bit.
Europe to go there. You need to pretend, for reasons I do not understand, that all of the achievements I've just described didn't happen, that somehow they don't deserve the credit. Look, in the world of economics, perhaps you're not familiar, we do exactly what you just said we oughtn't to do. We look at societies and say, they have a capitalist economic system. How did they do? And they have a socialist system with the different meanings of that term. And how did they do? And then we say they're different and part, not all, part of the story is the different system. And if I say to you that the socialist tradition has multiple interpretations, let me assure you that the capitalist tradition does as well. The leaders of Saudi Arabia right now call themselves capitalists.
Can I ask you, when you say socialist, what do you mean when you say socialist then? I'm trying to understand.
It is true. There's lots of denominations of capitalists too. I mean, you got the anarcho-capitalist fucking free market slave trade. CP distributing. We don't need police because we don't need police, and we don't need government regulation because we have Yelp. Sort of capitalists, and then there's I mean, arguably China, or like obviously Saudi Arabia, or on another spectrum you'll have the social democracies as well. Yeah, and libertarian capitalism, or like a Scandinavian sort of soft capitalism as well. Yeah, there's lots of denominations in there. They're wacky and wild.
And what this means. Can you give me like a cohesive, coherent?
That's good. No, let me answer. There are a variety. I'll give you 3 basic strains right now. They don't exhaust it, but they enable us to have a conversation. One strain, You leave enterprises in the hands of private capitalists, but you recognize that the capitalist system is so flawed, for example, in terms of inequality, in terms of business cycle instability, that you give a role to the government of massive intervention, rules, regulations, laws. You know, let me give you some examples. In France, it's the law that once you begin working after graduating from high school or college, every employer has to give you 5 weeks of paid vacation from the beginning. Nothing like that exists in the United States. But this is a society that won that for its people, by the way, by socialists who did.
Oh yeah. Also, this is a really big thing as well. When does a society, like, because he's basically in this sort of variation of like the word socialism here, this like mixed economy, because it would be technically still a mixed economy. We have a mixed economy here in the U.S. Norway, like the Scandinavian countries have like a mixed economy. Basically every single country that's not like South Sudan has a mixed economy. So the question would be, when does but we still call them capitalists, when would a mixed economy move more in the realm of more solidly socialist? What were the reforms that would have to come through? Would it be like a Bernie Sanders where workers have to comprise, like, I don't know, 50% of the of like the board of directors, or like 40% of the stocks have to be controlled by workers, or like the paid vacation, or like this or like that, or like what sectors of the economy are like decommodified and now we're just like, would it be like more of a socialist economy if like housing was decommodified, water, electric, internet was all decommodified? Would that be more in the realm of like a socialist economy, but still mixed economy because you still have some private business as well? That phase is weird, and when you call that socialism, I mean, that's completely up in the air.
That and put that on the books, as it is on most European countries. And socialists do that because they believe, for them, that socialism is when the...
Listen, I didn't want to call you out, Chino, but I was like, are you okay, buddy? Listen, I didn't take my meds today either, but...
Government comes in and regulates. That's one kind. Here's a second kind. These second kind of socialists, they don't believe it works real well if you do that. It's not enough. So they want to take a different step. They want the government to come in and actually own and operate enterprises, not merely regulate them with rules and laws. Then there's a third kind, which I stressed a few moments ago, which is not about the government. Doesn't care all that much whether the government runs an enterprise or the private does. They can figure out, whichever one works better. Let's be real practical. But for them, what socialism means is the transformation of the everyday life of working people. No longer do you go to work with other people telling you what to do, where to sit, what machine to use, what raw material to work on. And at the end of the day, you go home and you've got nothing more to say about what you poured your brains and muscles into. No, no, no. For these socialists, like me, the crucial thing is to reorganize the workplace, to bring real democracy, can you believe it, to the place where we work. In a country that claims to be democratic, we don't have democracy in the workplace. We have a tiny group of people telling the majority what to do, fully unaccountable to that majority. You know, if we really believed in democracy, this kind of socialism argues, we would recognize that that's where adults spend most of their adult life, at work. And if you...
Okay, so I guess here he's arguing like it's not the government that comes in. It's not the government that the government wouldn't be regulating this, but it's would this be like a societal sort of change? I guess this would be like a whole sort of like societal change where we all withhold our labor, just mass sort of general strike sort of thing, where none of us go to work, we all stay home, period, until our workplace gives us a real big definite role in the way the mode of production and the means of production are like allocated between the owner and the workers there. And then sometimes it would be like a sort of Bernie Sanders thing where there would be a policy where if the company was going to sell, workers will have to be forced to have the first bite at the apple when it comes to buying the company. I guess that's kind of like what he's arguing for there. I guess we can flesh that out.
You really believe in democracy, it should have been installed in the workplace, but capitalism doesn't permit that. The folks at the top want to keep the power, to keep their inordinate wealth,
He's
even
all about
at
co-ops?
the
Okay.
expense of no democracy and of a growth record inferior to what Russia did in the 20th century and what China is doing now. And that's an enormous price to pay.
Okay, so if you want to talk about the 2 and 3 definitions of socialism, that would be interesting to me. But I only heard 2 definitions of socialism here. Number one is just capitalism. I don't know when this like redefining happened of taking capitalism plus government intervention
tell
and
you.
calling
I'll
it.
be
Wait, well, let me finish. Right.
Okay.
I don't know why this was the case that state intervention into private markets to have some form of regulation or some form of socialized healthcare or giving workers 5 weeks off became socialism. It's clearly not socialism. It's so not socialism that I think Marx himself even said that the state would be heavily required in maintaining capitalism, more so than I guess even Marx was able to foresee, because he predicted a revolution of the proletariat in his lifetime. The idea that the state intervening and providing some sort of social welfare or safety net is that's just strictly a capitalist system with some government intervention. If we want to talk about the concept of the government owning and operating enterprises, or number 3, the idea is that the workers themselves have some like worker managed thing, I would be interested in discussing either of those 2 options, as I believe all 5 questions I laid out initially applied to them. But for number 1, I wholly reject that as a form of as a form of socialism. If you believe it is, I'd be curious if you can tell me what is the difference between the first thing you laid out and any capitalist that acknowledges that some level of government intervention is necessary in keeping the economy going.
I'd be glad to explain it to you. The history of socialism gets going in the middle of the 19th century. And at that time,
history
socialists
lesson
began to argue that capitalism was over, capitalism was done, and a better system was available and should be pursued. And they had a whole bunch of ideas about that. They were a relatively small group. If you know the history of Marx and Marxism, it begins relatively small. As the 19th century progresses, it gets larger.
I think that would be a good question for Destiny as well. What we went over earlier, like what point in time would you call this a socialist socialist country, right? Cuba still has private ownership, didn't they? Don't they? Did they ever abolish private ownership at any time during the history of Cuba? Does anybody know that? Here, let me see. I'm not well versed on the entire history of Cuba. Cuba lifts private business ban. Let's see. No, please. I'm reading from Time. Under pressure from the economic impact of COVID-19 and U.S. sanctions, epic meme, Cuba scrapped a ban on most private businesses on Saturday. The latest in a flurry of long-awaited reforms to its communist system triggered by the government in the recent weeks, and a sign that the state's grip on the economy is loosening. A series of reforms starting in 2010 have allowed Cubans to work as a self-employed people in the private sector, but they can currently only have jobs in 127 narrow categories defined by the government. Most of the 600,000 licenses granted in 2020 cover service industry jobs like running a restaurant or driving a taxi. On Saturday, the Labor Ministry, here I can show you guys what I'm reading. Pew. On Saturday, the Labor Ministry said that the list would be abolished. Instead, there would be a list of 127 jobs prohibited in the private sector, and the rest will more than 2,000 legal economic activities identified by the government will be fair game. It is the biggest shift in Cuba's system for a decade, according to, I don't want to butcher this name, but Diaz. O'Neill Castellanos. O'Neill Diaz Castellanos, a Cuban entrepreneur who runs the consultancy helping self-employed people run businesses on the island. This is a fundamental historic change that we've been asking for a long time. There's a lot of businesses that were illegal now and can be legalized, and there is going to be innovative ideas that will be unleashed. It's an economic opportunity, not just for entrepreneurs, but for people. I'm not sure how deep this what this the ban meant. Was this ban as in you couldn't run that as a private business, so it had to be like a co-op or something? I'd like to know, but that's something for reading on another day, not now.
And larger. And guess what happens when that movement gets larger? Debates begin to happen inside of it as to what in the world capitalism is and what in the world socialism is. And here we go. Some of the people.
I'd like to know, like, would if there's still private business, because there was still technically private business in Cuba, would that mean it's still would that mean it's still a capitalist system? I'm genuinely curious what Destiny would say to that. Where he draws the blurry line between capitalism and socialism. Does the entire, because then it would be like the entire system would have to be capitalist until there is no private business. So socialism would be an extremely small, extremely like a niche thing that has to meet every single one of that criteria, piece for piece for piece. There's no like is there an idea of a socialist country with capitalist flavor, like there is a capitalist country with socialist flavor? Is that a real thing? Drink water. I got you.
Decided that socialism as a radically alternative system wasn't in the cards. Could never happen in some views, could only happen in a distant future. Well, what then did socialists do in the meanwhile before a real change of system happened? Answer: advocate for the government to be taken over by universal suffrage. The mass of people would institute a socialism that was, if you like, a step in that direction. An early socialism, if you like. And by the way, there were big debates, pro and con, within the socialist movement about this. But they settled to understand, let's call it one kind of socialism. And that's what you have in Western Europe, in Scandinavia, to this day. Socialist parties advocate that, and the people in that society often vote those folks into power. I'll give you an example. The government in Portugal right now, a perfect example, European country. The government of Portugal is a coalition of 3 political parties. The largest is the Portuguese Socialist Party. The second one is the Portuguese Communist Party. And the third one is the Portuguese Green Party. They were elected as a coalition government in 2016. They were re-elected last year. Parenthetically, if your audience members don't know about this, that's because you live in a society that doesn't tell you about this, even though it's public knowledge to anyone interested in finding out. Those parties push a socialist agenda, by which they mean government rules and regulations. You may not like to call it socialists, but the people involved, and millions of them around the world, do. The other kind of socialism broke away from this first kind in the aftermath of the Soviet Revolution. They were in favor of taking that extra step. Socialism for them meant that the government should take over and operate enterprises, at least the industrial ones, maybe later the agricultural ones. And to underscore their distinction from the other socialists who just wanted government rules, regulations, and controls, they gave themselves the name communist. And that's the only difference between them, and it has been that way for nearly a century now, since the Russian Revolution. And then there's this third one, which has to do with transforming the workplace. Those are all socialisms. They argue, they debate, they have a rich literature. We have lots of empirical examples of all 3 kinds.
Yeah, so I'm curious, would like capitalism be like have to be just like a pure free market, and socialism would have to be a completely like sort of decommodified market, period, and then literally everything in between is called a mixed economy, and then there's some that's more socialist-y and some that's more capitalist-y. Weird. It's a hell of a world we live in
the world. And if people want to think about how they work and what kind of society they produce, there's loads of evidence there. We don't have to hypothesize or pretend or demonize either, because really it doesn't lend itself to that if you're serious.
Okay, first of all, just because a government calls itself socialist, I don't think that that's adequate to define said government as socialist.
Good. Give another. Fine. You can have another. That's what the debate is about.
Let's just hold on one sec.
Well,
yeah. Okay. So we have to give Destiny a chance to speak as well, because you
so
often have opportunities to
like,
give.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Okay. I guess like would you consider, like, for instance, like the Nazi Party? Would you consider that a socialist party, as they have socialism in the name? It doesn't seem like a good.
No. But
why not?
The minute you know anything about the Nazi Party, you'd understand that.
Would you say that is Portugal a socialist economy, or do they have markets? Do they have private investment?
Markets have nothing to do with.
I guess Destiny is going to take the route that if there is any private investment in the economy, period, then it has to be capitalist with social reforms. So capitalism would like encompass everything, all the way up until everything in a country would have to be completely decommodified, all workers ownership of the means of production, period. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but you know.
socialism.
Okay, can you tell me what is your definition of capitalism then? I just, because when I ask you what is socialism to you, I'm like, I understand that you can talk a lot and you can tell me what other people have considered socialism to be, but under your current definitions,
No, I gave you my definition.
Hold on, no, you haven't given me your definition. You've told me what other thinkers and what other countries in the past. Your definition is not what Portugal does, or it's not what the Portuguese Socialist or Communist parties. You're giving me what other people or other thinkers have thought what socialism is. Because under your current definition, number one, the Democratic Party in the United States would be considered a socialist party because they're in favor of heavy government intervention in terms of climate change or healthcare. And I don't know if you would agree. Would you agree that the Democratic Party in the United States of America is a socialist party, or if they?
How fair are you in the debate? How do you mean how far? We started like 20. What? How long have we been going for so far? We started like an hour ago. It seems like just about there. An hour 40 minutes ago, something like that. Have I been talking a lot? I'm not sure about how much I've been talking, but hard considering econ are not based on socialism or communism and capitalism. Back in Cuba, 72% of the workers working the government sector, that would probably be socialist. Maybe not by Destiny's definition. That probably may not be literally socialist. That may be just I don't know. There's maybe she may say that's state capitalist as well, which that there's an argument there. So I think Wolff's doing is all right. They're going pretty blow for blow now. Right now they're getting into the definition of capitalism and socialism. I guess Destiny's looking for really specific ones that we can kind of like hammer out the details of. And Wolff hasn't given that yet. So I guess we'll see if that'll happen.
They branded themselves. Okay, so it's clear then that the naming mechanism alone isn't enough for you, because the Nazi Party obviously called themselves socialists. I don't think many people, me included, would consider themselves socialists. And it's obvious that there must be some outside definition that you're alluding to, that when you call something socialist. So I'm just trying to figure out what can you tell me, what is capitalism to you? What does it mean when an economy or a society is a capitalist economy? What does that mean to you?
Well, let me answer. I gave you 3 definitions of socialism. I told you they weren't the only 3. This is a debate that's been going on inside socialism, and it's perfectly reasonable for me to give you those 3. It might be nice for you if there was one you could cling to, but that's not the way it is. The tradition is too big, too broad, too global for there to be one definition, as there is in most interesting things in the world, and certainly in many large organizations.
Well, it's mostly because Destiny's asking Wolff questions. A lot of questions, and Wolff is the one doing the answering. So he hasn't really had much time in the debate to do any real like insight necessarily. Because Wolff is the one doing a lot of the answering. How many questions has Wolff asked these since this debate started? Not many. Wolff's just been the one doing most of the talking, and Destiny's just been trying to poke holes in his sort of argument, basically. So this is kind of like that's how the debate's going so far. So I can see how you can see that, but I think that's just mostly because Wolff's doing the answering, and Destiny's doing the questions. So the questions would obviously be a lot shorter. Destiny's asking questions to find logical fallacies or contradictions. Yeah, that's what he's looking for. Contradictions and cringe in Wolff's points. Wolff doesn't need to ask questions because he knows Destiny doesn't know as much as him. Sure, but even during a debate, I don't think it's. But if that's the case, I don't think during a debate, instead of just talking, you can ask your opponent the questions, and if they don't know, then they'd look even worse than you just telling them, if that's the case. But I'm not sure if that's really happening. Link to the debate? Yeah.
Large traditions. I did give you my own.
You can go on the Rational National, or you can go on the Surfs TV, and it's in their VODs.
My own is focused on the transformation of the workplace. It's more interested in the micro transformation than in the macro ones, and particularly skeptical about the power of the government as having had some bad consequences. I want to learn from these early efforts to build socialism so that the future revolts against capitalism will have a better outcome than the ones that we've already had. They achieved something. Let me finish. They achieved many things we want to hold on.
Was he defending as a claim? Capitalism better than socialism. That's what he's trying to do. So obviously, if he can find, even if so, it's in law, this would probably be called like preponderance of the evidence. If like instead of like beyond a reasonable doubt. So for Destiny would be like if capitalism is even marginally better than what Wolff is providing when it comes to the socialism arguments that he is, then we shouldn't change from capitalism to socialism because the preponderance of the evidence says that we shouldn't.
And they made some mistakes we want to avoid. And that's exactly what it means to learn from the past. Now, let me address the question of capitalism. Here's what capitalism is not distinguished by, and therefore is not useful as a definition: markets. Slavery has markets. It's a different economic system. Feudalism had markets for much of its history. That's not a definition of capitalism that's unique. Capitalism doesn't uniquely have markets. That's silly. Free or controlled markets, which is all we've ever had in the world, the controlled kind, are as old as Plato and Aristotle, who argued over markets. By the way, both of them opposed markets and thought they were socially destructive institutions. Just for as a footnote you might be interested in. But capitalism is unique in one way. It's not a system that's unique in its markets. It's not a system that's unique in its quote unquote free enterprises. Those are as old as Methuselah. But here is what's unique.
Who?
Earlier systems, for example, slavery, organized the production of goods and services around a dichotomy, a slave and a master. The master owned all the equipment, all the means of production, and including the worker himself and herself. He owned them. And that was a very unusual way of organizing things, but it existed for a long time. Did it have markets? Often. Did it sometimes exist without markets?
Wait. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene says she'll schedule a debate between Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the Green New Deal after she finishes reading all 14 pages. Wow, wait a second. The debate goes on. Wait a second. Is this real? Is this going to be an actual thing? Wait, is this going to be an actual thing? Is AOC going to accept the debate? She's dumb as fuck. But if she accepts the debate, oh my gosh. Wait, this is real. Sorry, little tangent. I'm glad I ran into you today, AOC, to plan our debate about the Green New Deal. After I finish reading all 14 pages, like we agreed, I'll schedule time for our debate. Wait a second, she's been railing against the Green New Deal all this time and she hasn't even read it? How are you so against the also, wait, I can't say that. Never mind. Why are you talking about something that you've never read? What's happening? What's happening? I don't get it. Whatever.
You bet. Then there's feudalism, radically different. No master, no slave. Nobody's anybody else's property. But you know how that works? You have a small group of lords at the top and a mass of serfs at the bottom. And the way the system works is that the serfs swear loyalty to the lord, and the lord in return to the serf. And the whole thing is sanctified in Europe by the Catholic Church.
Shush, Bones. I'm busy.
And then
Okay,
let me finish. Then comes capitalism.
Let me finish.
It's not a master and a slave. It's not a lord and a serf. It's a completely different arrangement. It's a contract. It's an employer and an employee. They don't swear anything to one another, and neither owns the other one. But they enter into a contract in which the employer says, I'm going to give you a wage at the end of the week. You're going to give me your brains and muscles for these hours of these days. And that's a deal we're going to make. And that's how we organize production. That's the distinction of capitalism. That's what I mean by capitalism.
You haven't given me a definition of capitalism at all. You've told me a bunch of things that capitalism isn't, and then you've given me a bunch of random collected facts of history, but none of these things.
Not at all.
Absolutely. For instance, when you talk about how markets aren't unique to capitalism, that's great. Worker management isn't unique to socialism. Worker management can exist under a capitalist system right now. I know that you like to talk about Mondragon.
Let Destiny finish. Let Destiny finish. We're going to go one at a time here, okay? So let Destiny finish and then we'll continue.
When we talk about worker-managed firms or worker-managed co-ops, these things exist under capitalism. What do you? Okay, well, what are you saying then? Can I hold on real quick? I'm sorry. Can I get an explicit answer that is answered within the last 50 years without going back into feudalism or what the Pope said or the schism of the Catholic Church? I want to know very concretely, without moralizing or loading anything, or without talking about something that happened in 1850. What is capitalism to you? Can you just tell me or explain what capitalism is? Because it sounds like go ahead.
Any definition of anything is a process of separating it from that which it is not. That's all any definition ever was.
But we don't typically do definitions by naming every single thing.
Let him answer. Let him answer.
A dog is you differentiate it from a cat. Otherwise, there's no way to do it. To differentiate and to give a definition of capitalism, you have to distinguish it from that which it is not. Those other systems didn't use an employer-employee relationship. That is the core distinguishing quality of capitalism. Slavery doesn't have that. Feudalism doesn't have that. And I never used the phrase worker management. Managers are not what we're talking about. Owning and operating. If you want to use a word, it's workers as their own boss, workers as their own board of directors. If you like, you can use the colloquialism in the United States that has existed throughout our history. A worker co-op, a cooperative, one worker, one vote, all decisions, majority vote. That doesn't exist in capitalism. That exists in a different relationship.
I don't believe all decisions should, well, here. I don't think it's feasible necessarily when we're making, if this is in like a transitionary state with like a market socialist sort of thing, there are lots of things that go into the sort of decisions that are made as a business that sometimes they need to be done quickly, and not all the time do workers have the ability to be as informed as they can be. That's why we don't always do direct democracy. You kind of have to have intermediaries there. And I guess you could call that bureaucracy. But with some bureaucracy, you can get a whole lot more things done where there are people working under people that you elect. That sort of thing. Or where it's a worker co-op, but they vote for their managers, sort of thing. And those managers, they have lots of control over the workplace, but they are completely constrained within the sort of bubble that the people who are working at that firm, or the people who are communally owning that firm, what their wishes are. Yeah, it's inherently socialist structure. There's no private ownership. Is that a good take? My past two posts? No, you never make a good take. Fuck you, Maffinity. Love you, buddy.
Among the people at the workplace. Not slavery, not feudalism, and not employer-employee, because those are different people in each of those systems. Worker co-op, that's no longer the case. That's why it's a radically different socialist system, unlike any of the others.
How can you say that that's unlike any of the others when co-ops can exist today under capitalist economies?
Slavery can exist and did in our
You're
country.
not answering my question. I don't want you to give the negative of everything I'm saying. You're saying today that this is a unique thing that exists.
There's never been a problem in any society of which we have historical record for different class structures, different systems to coexist. You're asking me a question as if it were, is this possible? It's never been anything other than the norm.
But you're telling me that in your society, or I could be wrong, you can correct me, but it sounds like in your society, you would exclusively like firms to be in the hands of workers, which would necessarily preclude.
Not at all.
Right.
I've never written that. I've never said it. You're just attributing things to me.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying very hard to understand what you're saying, but the problem is your answers are very long-winded. You're not really answering my question. So am I to understand then that you are in favor of a society where workers have the option to vote on and have control over the workplace, but there's also room for a private investment and the government intervenes in things like healthcare or education? Is this like the type of society you're aiming for?
My guess would be that the transition from capitalism to what I'm talking about would have long periods of time, typically, where these different class structures, these different systems coexist with one another.
That's what we have today.
B, no, you don't have it in anything like the way I want it.
Well, how do you want it? What's different from your vision than what we have today?
Well, what we have today is predominantly capitalist with smatterings of the other. I'm interested in having predominantly socialist with smatterings of the other. That's the difference.
And without disallowing private investment or disallowing individual owners, how do you get there?
Private investment is a completely different matter. You can have private investment and worker co-ops.
How?
It exists. What's the problem? Why would
I ever invest in a company without gaining some amount of equity in the company? They have no obligation to return to me any profit. I would never invest in a co-op.
Why would you invest in you invest in businesses in the United States?
Correct. Because businesses.
Let me finish. Hoping, for example, for something called a capital gain. Mm-hmm. You hope that if you buy the shares and if the company does real well, you will be able to sell the shares at some future point to another investor at a higher price. Correct. If that company's growth is the product of its worker co-op organization, you're perfectly happy if you can make an investment that grows over time.
But in your world, those shares don't exist.
First of all, there exist where these kinds of enterprises exist in the world. So this is not a hypothetical.
Then they're not worker co-ops by definition.
Sure they are.
A worker okay, tell me, my definition might be incorrect, so you can correct me. My understanding is that what makes something a worker co-op, or what makes something employee-owned, is that the means of production or whatever firm you operate at is wholly owned and operated by the workers, meaning that when profits are generated by that company, they're returned to the workers, and when decisions are made about that company, those decisions are made by the workers. If that is the definition that we're going by, there is no room for private investment there.
Right, but that's the wrong definition and not the one that operates in the world.
Give me your
definition of a worker co-op is that the workers make the key decisions. They are their own board of directors. They may make the decision democratically, to raise capital for their business by selling shares. Of course they could do that. Those shares would not allow the people who own them to do the steps that they can in capitalism. They would not, for example, be able to dictate who's the board of directors, because the workers themselves are their own board of directors. But there's no problem with private investment. There never was.
And my question is, why?
No,
I don't need an example. No example. We have this definition. Okay, I just want to hone in on this definition. Okay, my question is why would any individual ever invest in a company that doesn't have a fiduciary responsibility to their investors? So, for instance, in your world, if I were to buy 20% of a co-op, their workers tomorrow could say, you know what, we're all bored. We don't want to do this anymore. We're going to move on. We're shutting the business down. And now I've just completely lost out on my investment because they have no responsibility to me because I have non-controlling shares. So the only shares you're selling are non-controlling. Why would any private investment ever come in knowing that that co-op never has an obligation to make a profit or return a dividend to the investors?
Okay. I think I see. All right, so this was a sort of idea that I had for a little while, because it seemed private investment is an incredibly important part of a market. Is incredibly important part of a market a lot of the times. There are lots of economies around the world. They usually don't perform as well without some sort of like private investment. It really helps lots of companies get off the ground. So that's important, right? I do believe that there can be a worker co-op that could obviously be privately traded before it's publicly traded. Private investment isn't important. All right, okay. There can be a worker co-op that can be privately traded and then decides to go publicly traded and then can sell shares that are controlling, but and then they obviously would have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to return a profit. In like a sort of market socialist sort of society, this would be like the closest that we could get to not have necessarily a CEO, because not in every single corporation is the CEO elected necessarily by the shareholders. Still, and also the stakeholders would have the stakeholders would have a far more degree of latitude depending on what happens, the conditions in the company, what the company necessarily does, while still having an obligation to not all companies have a CEO as well. Still having an obligation to its shareholders who can still participate in that corporation. That can still happen. I still want to go over that. I want to like hammer out the specific details of that. That's something that I've like thought over that I haven't that I haven't spoken on. I've been doing some reading into it, but I haven't like come down to a complete sort of like definition that I feel that's really airtight. I'd love to get there because that sounds like a really fun idea for like a market socialist sort of society. Just getting all the wheels lined up, getting all the gears lined up in that. Take some time, but hey, listen, if you care about it, then that's something that I think that you should think about as well. I'd love to hear some things from you guys about that as well, because I think it's a really good thing to hammer down on, the sort of private investment, because before like class consciousness, before like the entire world is taken over in a beautiful sea of socialist reform, there would still be markets, there would still be capitalist forces that would want to overtake that. So obviously that's something. Are we talking about transition to socialism with investment? Yeah, it'd be a transition to socialism. It'd be like a market socialist sort of society that would be there, because it's near impossible to just take a society and just like dump it and be like, oh, you're socialism now, especially with America around, with Russia around, with China around, who have a lot of interests that don't really line up like that. Slave owners are really important to building things because they have slaves. Fuck private investment. They blew their chance. Now we're coming for their shit. Okay.
There's many companies listed on the stock exchange right now that pay no dividends to their investors here in the United States. It's a normal part of our stock.
No, absolutely not. They might not pay.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about capital markets 101. They might not pay a dividend, but
then you're badly misinformed.
I'm not. I promise you, the foundation of the stock market in the United States is a returning of capital to the people that are the ones doing the investment in companies. Now, it might be the case, as you correctly point out. Absolutely, it might be the case.
Really, you're unaware. Most of the most dynamic companies in this country are selling stock to people to whom they have no responsibility, legal or otherwise, to give them a dividend ever.
Okay, Professor, do you believe that a dividend is the only way that you can return capital to shareholders?
That's not the point.
That absolutely is the point.
You made the point. What is the company responsible for? The company is responsible to run the company. They are not responsible to give money back, whether it's dividend, return of capital, or any other way, to the people who give them the money to buy shares. People who give them the money are gambling. They hope that they can sell the shares for more, and they will sell the shares to anybody who can buy them. The company's not responsible to buy those shares. The company's not responsible for what price they can get. If they lose their shirt, tough luck. It's not an obligation or a responsible. That's the way the law of this country works for the stock market. And there's no problem in a worker co-op saying to investors, we're going to grow better than what you can get from a capitalist enterprise. So buying a share of our stock will give you a better shot to sell it at a higher price later. And I can give you examples.
I don't want examples.
No.
We don't need examples.
I'm going to give you an example of a company that did that, just so you can see why an investor would do it. I mean, really, you can make the theater of your hand on your face.
I'm not making the problem is you said something that's just so on its face absurdly incorrect about the characterization of U.S. capital markets. Do you not agree that there exists a legally binding, the SEC literally regulates fiduciary responsibilities to investors? I don't like this trick you've pulled.
It has nothing to,
Let me finish, please. Let me finish. You've made it sound as though I believe the only way to return capital to shareholders is through dividends. That's absolutely not the case. That's one reading of it. You can return it via stock buybacks. You can return it via increase in growth.
You're not obligated to do any of that. You're not obligated to do any of that.
You have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders. Of course you do.
If you take my advice, I teach these courses. If you read what fiduciary responsibility means, it's an abstract generalization. It can be easily demonstrated in thousands of legal cases that there is no obligation of any material sort that they return money to the people who invest in them. It is perfectly okay.
Wolff is still talking about I think Wolff is still talking about dividends. But I think probably one of the big things is Destiny wants to talk about how if you open up your business to be invested in, okay, it's publicly traded. You have to be you open yourself up to other people putting money into you because they think that your business is going to do better. Their stock is going to get thicker. It's going to get bigger, or they're going to be paid in dividends, or both. But and you have a legal responsibility. You can be taken to jail. You can be shut down if you don't do that. So I'm not sure if I'm not sure if Wolff's tackling this point in the way that would be satisfactory.
To run your business as you think it should best be done, short of committing fraud or illegal activity, and that would apply in any system. The investor is taking a chance, buying your shares in the hopes of selling them at a higher price. It happens all the time, and it would be perfectly consistent with workers who run their own enterprises and are their own board of directors. That's
okay. So I guess you would have to say that you can open yourself up to be publicly traded, but instead of it being like you are public, you do that because actually, I was thinking about that. Wouldn't that be? That's kind of like that's interesting. That's kind of like an ANCAP sort of ideal, where there wouldn't be the government regulation there that say that you are forced to, you have to return money. At least have the best interest of your shareholders in mind, or like one of the best interests of your shareholders in mind. Change that to the best, to one of the best, right? And then that could be like argued over in court. I guess if they would like to do like a class action lawsuit for all the investors or something like that. There wouldn't be that government regulation there, so you could technically invest into a business in like a market socialist society with a co-op, and then they could technically decide to shut the business down. That could technically happen. But you could have a system where if something like that happened, then you would be obligated to get all your money back or something along those lines. So you didn't lose necessarily any money if they decide to just shut down like that, or it would just be, or the government regulation would just be completely gone. And you could just throw your money in, and it'd just be like be more like roulette, you know? Just hey, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, and that's kind of like ANCAPy a little bit, little ANCAPy. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, but that's kind of an argument that would appeal. That's an argument that would appeal to like sort of ANCAPs. That's interesting. I was thinking about that. Wolff Hub premium subscription.
It's not a problem. Never was. There's nothing inconsistent with private investment on the one hand and worker co-ops on the other. Now, if you have a worker co-op system, they might decide, because we have democracy now, that they don't want that they would like to be the owners as well as the board of directors of their own enterprise. That's possible. That would be one of the variations of worker co-op economic systems, just like we have variations of capitalist systems.
Can I ask you, so in a private business in the United States, if I invest my money in a business, a publicly traded business, if they were to cash out all of that money, just close the business down and run, you're telling me that in the United States, that company wouldn't be held liable for scamming its investors?
Absolutely. If that company had a good lawyer and showed that they made an honest effort to have a business and then it didn't work out and they closed it down, the investor would have absolutely no standing.
Exactly. You're right. But you used a word there, an honest effort, and it's doing all the heavy lifting in that statement. Of course, you absolutely must show a court that you are making a good, this is part of your fiduciary responsibility. You are making a good faith effort to return money.
That's what the worker co-ops could easily do. We're making a good faith, honest effort to make a business. And that business requires us to do X, Y, and Z. And the private investor got nothing to do. That happens every day in the United States.
That's not what a worker co-op's maximizing for, though. A worker co-op, if by your definition, which is a democratically voted organization, is going to be trying to take into account what their members are voting for. They might not vote in the best interest of a shareholder. They might vote to do something completely different.
That would be understood by the shareholder.
But that's
by the way,
point.
only the most naive shareholder in the United States believes that the company's decisions are intended to do the best for the shareholder. I can show you 50,000 legal cases in which that's not the case, and which it is contested in the courts, and you could have that in a worker co-op.
That's great, and I can show you the Dow Jones, the Nasdaq, and the S&P 500. We could go to the UK and look at the FTSE 250, the FTSE 1, and I can show you histories of markets where companies do reliably over long periods of time return profits, whether in the form of dividends or the increase in your share price, to people that invest in those companies. I'm sure you can show me a lot of things that happen that are bad in capital markets where companies scam people, much as I can show you bad things that happen like famines under the USSR. But pointing out to a few bad actors does not clear up the problem of the fact that investing in workers have no obligation to return.
No, we're not talking about bad actors. You're inventing these things. We were talking about private investment and worker co-ops. You had made a statement that these somehow couldn't coexist. I'm explaining to you that there's not the slightest problem. You want to change the topic, that's very nice, but that's what the topic was. We weren't comparing goods and bad stories. We were explaining how and why private investment is not an either or in relationship to worker co-ops. One of the fastest growing industries in Spain is something called the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation. It's a family of worker co-ops. It is now the seventh.
Worker managed, though. I don't know if this isn't even good.
It is the seventh largest corporation in Spain. It started with six corporations. Excuse me.
It's a federation of corporations, and it's not even worker managed. That's just worker owned, and they have all the same exploitative problems. They go to South America for labor. They rely on contract labor. Chomsky has criticized the Mondragon thing for existing in a capitalist framework forever. And even if this was your go-to killer example, the Mondragon Federation of Co-ops exists under a capitalist framework.
Could I finish, or do you need to tell me?
Is this under a capitalist framework? I guess, is Destiny still? I don't know. He may. I guess that may be right. Where he's just like, yeah, it has to be complete 100%, no private ownership. Period. For this to be socialism. Interesting. Is there a way to have like a socialistic company then, like just worker managed if it's still in a capitalist society? Is that possible to Destiny? It's weird.
About the Mondragon Corporation.
I didn't mean to enter.
Anything under capitalism isn't socialism? Maybe. I don't know. That was really weird to me. I don't know. Maybe he'll try and clear that up. But to say anything under capitalism is never socialism is interesting.
Interrupt your lecture. I'm sorry. Continue.
Sure you did. Come on. Who you think you're kidding? The Mondragon Corporation has many parts. The biggest single part of it are a collection of worker co-ops. If this were the United States, we'd call it a holding company, which is a collection of subsidiaries that do a variety of things. It's very common in the United States, and it's very common in the world of worker co-ops to do that as well. The different divisions help each other. The co-ops support one another. That's how the Mondragon Corporation went from 6 people in 1956 to over 100,000 now. Most of the people in the Mondragon Corporation function within their members, about 200 companies, each of which has workers, one person, one vote, making democratic decisions. This company has been extraordinarily successful. It has outcompeted its capitalist competitors. That's how it became so large. That's how it becomes so successful as it has been. It has rules. It maximizes, because you raised that before, a variety of objectives. It is not focused exclusively on profits. The notion that profit is the bottom line is the very convenient economic nonsense, because profits go into the hands of the capitalists at the top. And of course, they want the company to maximize profits because that's what they get. They don't maximize wages because that's what they don't get. Other people get that. If the other people ran the business, its objectives would not just be profit, but the well-being of those workers, the community's well-being, a whole lot of other objectives to maximize. And you'd have to choose among them. You wouldn't have the essential profit maximizing, which we teach in economics, without explaining to our students that by maximizing profit, the whole company's life is devoted to maximizing the return of a very small number of people within it. Okay?
Oh my gosh, Dark Case, thank you so much for the Twitch Prime, Twitch Gaming. Oh, they changed it to Twitch Gaming? Cringe. Well, thank you so much for the Twitch Gaming sub. I really appreciate that. You're so deep into the frenzy. You're so deep in there. My goodness. Well, congratulations. You have access to some of the cutest emotes this side of the ex-USSR. I'm happy for you. They're beautiful emotes as well. You can spam boo next time you see boo. Balls deep. Yeah, that's true. Or if you don't have balls, clit deep. You know, we're inclusive here.
This is what has changed in a worker co-op. That's why it's so different from capitalism. Its decisions, investment, growth, distribution of income, all the big decisions would be made with a different set of objectives because a different set of people with different interests are making those decisions. For a society like ours that blabbers on about democracy, you'd think this was the most attractive possible way to proceed because it democratizes the economy by democratizing the enterprises at the core of that economy. Instead, we live in a society which pretends that you can have political democracy, even though in economics you have an autocracy, a tiny aristocracy running each enterprise, doing what it wants, maximizing the part of the output it gets, namely the profit. And therefore, we get surprised that our political democracy doesn't work real well. Hello, that's because it's trying to sit on top of an economic system that is the opposite of democratic. The proposal of socialists is a proposal to extend democracy from the political realm to the economic realm. Why that is frightening to people who otherwise say they favor democracy, I find amazing.
I find it equally amazing that throughout this entire monologue, all you're advocating for are liberal markets with a little bit more government intervention. If you want to talk about Mondragon, absolutely. If you want to talk about Mondragon, we can talk about Mondragon until we're both blue in the face. One, it's not worker managed, okay? It is just worker owned. A lot of the management that comes within a lot of the Mondragon Federation come from other workers, but they do not vote on all their policies or productions. That is absolutely not true. Number two, Mondragon does run itself for profit. That's why if you only change the means of production and not the mode of production, you are still producing commodities for a profit. Now, it happens in this case that the profit is going to the workers, but it still absolutely runs for a profit. That's why socialists point to it and say, look at how successful it is. Part of the reason why it's successful is the amazing revenues and profits that it returns to its workers that are generated. And then number three, Mondragon, in order to
wait, just let him finish. Then we'll...
Okay. Sure. For me, I would imagine that like worker ownership would be like hand in hand with worker managed. If you're voting on all your managers, this no longer something that's sort of top-down thing from a system that you do not control, that you just work there. That's just doesn't really happen. You can change the managers. You can change the way the managers are chosen. You can completely remove managers as well, and you could technically do that. Or I mean, you could vote for like a panel of workers in the corporation, in the company, in the co-op. To handle those things as well. I think if it's worker owned, and they vote on their managers. Now I'm not sure. I don't know the ins and outs of Mondragon, but if it's worker owned and they vote on those managers, I would still say that's worker managed, is it not? We say like still even like a representative democracy. Let's say it's like just like a single state. It's still like a people-run state. Now, obviously, we can talk about all the problems that can have, like manufactured consent. We all know about this, right? But I would still say that's not. I wouldn't say that's like a dictatorship. every single elected official is in there, and they have to and they have to have the best intents of their constituents in mind to be able to even keep that position, election after election. So the people are still the ones that control those people, but we can't vote on every single policy all the time. We wouldn't have any time to do anything. It's good to have some people do like some jobs or like some things, or at the very least make some decisions without consulting the entire group all of the time. And if they disagree with those positions, they could always I don't know, censure. They could take away, vote out that manager or group of managers that are not doing well, and that could be like an election time schedule, or there could be like a vote of no confidence sort of thing that could happen. But that can all be controlled by the workers as well. But I still would say that's a worker managed, but that's just me personally. Weird rigid terms. I'm not sure if Wolff agreed to those terms. So they could be rigid terms, but Wolff could have like made a mistake and agreed to those terms. I forget exactly if he did.
In order to continue growing, one of the problems that Mondragon has started to face recently, and it's one of the reasons why it's criticized by people like Chomsky, is because it's had to continue to acquire more and more workers that do not get controlling shares, that don't have the ability to know what's going on. Mondragon also trades across markets, including going to places like South America and trading with exploited workers. So I don't think that Mondragon exists under a capitalist mode of economics. Like Mondragon exists and interacts with other people within a capitalist economy, which I think is good. If Mondragon works and succeeds, that's awesome. I think it's cool. I like to see alternative types of businesses succeed, but I don't understand how you can talk about the successes of Mondragon and then say that, like, well, this is an example of the failures of capitalism when Mondragon exists and thrives right now under a capitalist framework, interacting with so many other capitalist sections of the economy, so many other capitalist countries in the world. My problem is that by moving more towards what you want, you would use government policy to necessarily disallow the types of private ownership or private investment that have been so important with other types of financial around the world. You can keep saying that I'm making stuff up, but at the end of the day, the problem that we're having, the problem we're having is the definition of socialism, and I noticed that this is like it seems to be a key problem with people that call themselves socialists, is your definition of socialism is so amorphous and morphing at any particular point in time. I still don't really
you seem to be having trouble with it, but that doesn't make it amorphous.
It absolutely is amorphous. Even your definition of capitalism is absolutely amorphous. Where I hear
you're just not familiar with it.
I'm absolutely familiar with it. I absolutely am able to. If you would like to ask me for my definitions of any of these things, I would be glad to explain it. And you can tell me, you can correct me, Professor, if you think I'm incorrect in my understanding of things. But I believe that when I ask you to tell me like what is capitalism, what is socialism, and it feels like I'm listening to Trebek, read off the board in Jeopardy, I feel like that's damaging to the position that you're trying to explain more so than me asking the question.
Yeah, well, let me correct you about Mondragon, which is, by the way, how it's pronounced. Mondragon has multiple parts. Some of the parts are the adjustments it's made to living in a capitalist world. That's absolutely correct. That would have to be any worker.
Oh, hello? Wolff, no!
That forms now or hasn't.
Wolff, are you okay? He's gone.
Richard, you're cutting out.
Industries that grew up in feudalism.
Oh, sorry. Did you mind repeating that last line? You just cut out there for 1 second.
Right. Any worker co-op that forms now has to exist within a framework of a society that's organized differently. That's exactly the way it was when capitalism emerged out of feudalism. The early capitalist enterprises, towns, villages had to exist within a feudal framework. They had to come to terms with that. Some of them were able to do it. Others of them disappeared or were overthrown by feudalism until they got big enough and strong enough and learned from the mistakes of early experiments in capitalism how to set up a system that would be what it now is, the global system. I expect the socialists to kind of replicate that experience. Russia was an experiment. China's a better one, Cuba, Vietnam, and so on. They make efforts. They're learning what you do, what you don't do, what you replicate, what you avoid, and they will get eventually to the scale and sense of how to do it on a more global scale. That's how feudalism happened. That's how slavery happened. That's how capitalism happened. And it's reasonable to expect that's how socialism will happen. There is no simple definition of socialism that would be, to use your words, correct. No agency gives you out a license. This is correct. That one isn't. A tradition as lively, as global as socialism is always going to have different interpretations, different definitions that argue with one another. That's healthy, that's normal, there's nothing fuzzy or amorphous about it. The idea that you can have one definition is an authoritative and authoritarian notion that there isn't debate and contestation when there always is. My job was to give you 3 of the major definitions of socialism that contest in the world today, that are widely accepted.
Yes, I really don't like the criticism. Well, you have to do things within socialism, or else it's never. But you have to do things within capitalism. But if you do anything that's socialistic in capitalism, then we'll never that can never ever be it can never ever be considered socialist, like, ever. I don't know. I do like bringing it back to, like, well, I mean, during the feudal times, the people who wanted to do capitalism, well, they still under the fucking king. They still have to, like, give, like, a portion of their grains out and do this, and they have to live under that feudal system. They have to come to terms with that. Like, you have to come to terms with the system that we have now. There's not really much that you can do necessarily besides keep going and advocating for a better world.
By everybody? Of course not. But those are the ones that are around, and it's reasonable to talk about the tradition in that way. Mondragon let me finish. Mondragon is an experiment, a very successful one. You can, if you like, attribute everything to capitalism that happens that's good, and attribute everything bad that happens to the absence of capitalism.
I'm not
this
doing
isn't
that. I've
very
never done
interesting, and that's really not very interesting. And I'm not going to get into that. I will tell you that there are some remarkable things that Mondragon has done. Along the way, the majority of its workers voted the following rule: the best paid person in Mondragon cannot get more than 8 to 9 times what the least best paid person is. This was an attempt to this. I've been there. I've watched it. I've looked at it.
It's just not true. So you're telling me that of all the employees in Mondragon, the highest paid employee.
That was a decision made by a large number of the worker co-ops that make that kind of decision.
So you're telling me that the highest paid employee in Mondragon, it has a ratio of what
let me finish. In many of the component co-ops, because it's a holding company. It's a holding company of many co-ops. In many of those co-ops, I can't speak for everyone, this was a common rule. I went and spoke with them. I interrogated them about it. And that's what I discovered. They passed a rule after much debate at a maximum difference of 8 to 1. You know that corporate CEOs in this country get roughly, on average, 300 times what the lowest paid worker or even the average worker in their employee class gets.
What is the ratio?
Let me finish. They were able to do something about inequality. Wow, here they are, successful and growing. They're the 7th biggest corporation. They're the envy of most other corporations in Europe who cannot show such a history, but they were concerned not just to maximize profit, but to do something like limit the inequality that otherwise is so corrosive to societies like ours. And they were able to do that. That's an interesting quality. Thomas Piketty released a book in 2014 in which he demonstrates in 600 pages that every single capitalism we have a record of has built into it a tendency to ever greater inequality that is only periodically interrupted by revolts from below, like what we had in the 1930s in this country, which never are durable because once the revolt passes, the tendency of capitalism to inequality grows. That has always been an inspiration to socialists to advocate for a system that might have within it a built-in mechanism to at least reduce the inequality that haunts capitalism. And the reality is that Mondragon, and not only that, have demonstrated that there is a quality of worker co-ops that does, and effectively, a good job of addressing the inequality that otherwise haunts capitalism. And that would be an interesting way to understand why socialists would be drawn. They are not worker managed. The way a corporation works is there are 3 layers roughly: the employees who do most of the work, the managers who supervise the employees, and then another group of people to whom we give the name directors, the board of directors.
Here, I found a little something. I found something in the spare time. One second. This principle is one of the most valuable examples of solidarity at Mondragon and at the strong implications of economic justice. At Mondragon, there are agreed upon wage ratios between worker owners who do executive work for those who work in a field or factory and earn, in theory, a minimum wage. These ratios range between 3 to 1 to 9 to 1. In different cooperatives, the average is 5 to 1. That is, general manager on average, in the average Mondragon cooperatives earns 5 times as much as the theoretical minimum wage paid in his or her cooperative. This ratio is in reality smaller because there are few Mondragon worker owners that earn minimum wages. Their jobs being somewhat specialized and they're classified at their higher wage levels. In addition, the ratios are further diminished because Spain uses a progressive tax rate. So those at higher wages are actually pay higher taxes. Okay. It should be noted that although the ratios at cooperatives vary, it is worker owners within the cooperatives who decide through democratic vote what these ratios should be. Thus, if a general manager of a corporation has a ratio of 9 to 1, is because the worker owners decided it was a fair ratio to maintain. Considering wages in comparable jobs in other similar local companies and acknowledging the complexity, scope, and technologies of enterprise corresponding to that job. So it is worker operated. Yeah. They voted for this. Now Destiny can say there aren't managers. I'm quite sure they voted for those managers as well, but like I said, I'm not necessarily sure of all the ins and outs of everything. Here, do you think we can look that up real quick? Little tangent. What manager? Lots of terms for manager. Lots of terms for manager. Here, we'll I'll work on that, but we'll keep playing this.
Shareholders elect the board of directors because they're the ones who receive legally the profits, and they decide what is to be produced, how it's to be produced, what technology to use, where the production happens, and what is done with the profits. The managers don't do that.
Okay,
so
gentlemen, we're coming up to the hour now. We have had a disproportionate amount of talking time, I think, by you, Professor Wolff. Well, at the same time, Destiny, would you want to give a closing statement to this as we're coming up? I'll give you a couple minutes to respond. And then we got to move to the audience Q&A.
Sure, yeah. I mean, man, there's so many things. Citing, I just think it's incredibly disingenuous to open with Mondragon has 80,000 employees, and they voted to have an 8-to-1 pay between owners and their or not owners, the highest paid employee and the lowest paid employee. But that's not true. You corrected yourself after I corrected you, which I'm grateful for. It's within the co-ops, within that federation. I'm willing to bet that if I were to ask you, you probably couldn't tell me what the highest paid employee within the Mondragon Federation is. What is the ratio of their pay to the lowest paid employee of the Mondragon Federation? Because it has an incredible vertical structure in terms of how it interacts with itself. Now, I could just as easily construct you a world where the ratio of pay between the CEO of Amazon or Walmart is much smaller, where the ratio closes between the lowest paid employee. If I create a Walmart or Amazon holding company and I simply split off all the managerial people or some sectors of that company into their own individual companies and break it up like that, the way that Mondragon has. Not to say that Mondragon is not to say that they have totally different sectors. I'm not making this stuff up. Everybody can go and look at how the company is structured. Everybody can go and look at the different types of things. They have grocery stores. They've got a financial.
Participatory management here. Worker owners participate in decision making at the management of cooperatives. This implies development of self-managed skills, formal education, and adequate information provided to improve worker owners' ability to participate completely in decision making. I think that's super cool. Super cool, actually. There are lots of mentions of managing and management in this document as well. It's way back machine, way back.
At a time, gentlemen.
Yes,
right,
but
so
they do not separate out their managers. They do not separate out one group of workers with high pay from others. That's a hustle. That would be a hustle.
I agree.
So every worker is an owner in the company? Yes. But Mondragon is it's a holding company where other companies are a part of. I'm not sure what the wage ratio between like the lowest paid Mondragon worker within the co-op of Mondragon to the highest executive in Mondragon is. I'm not sure about that. And I'm not sure what the voting roles of like the corporations, the co-ops themselves in Mondragon, what that is either.
About Mondragon is just, that's make believe.
I guess
your argument is so difficult that you have to make up the information to support it. Too bad.
My argument is so concrete that I don't think I've had to bring up feudalism a single time to make any of my points
or
ask you. Any
that would make your analysis a little richer than it is.
So something I'm curious about. Why wouldn't you consider, just going by the incredibly generous definition you give me on point one of socialism, why wouldn't you consider the Democratic Party of the United States a socialist party? As a party that wants to see more stuff returned to Americans, wants to see people with greater control of the workplace, had members that were pushing for 20% ownership in the share of companies Bernie Sanders AOC. Why wouldn't you consider the Democratic Party of the United States a socialist party?
Because it opposes almost everything you just mentioned. It has a small wing now that is in favor of it, who, by the way, call themselves socialists. But the establishment of the Democratic Party, its history over the last 100 years since Franklin Roosevelt.
That's not fair. Why would we talk about the history of it? That's not relevant.
Because history is always present.
It's absolutely not relevant. You said yourself that the way that look at socialism today is different than it was 100 years ago.
Joseph Biden is a product of that history, as he himself says. That party has been unable to make a government. They couldn't even preserve the level of government intervention that was achieved in the 1930s. The last 70 years have been a rollback of the New Deal, an undoing of it, and that was done as much by the Democratic Party as the Republicans. The Republicans pushed harder. The Democrats could not only not advance on what was achieved in the 1930s, they couldn't even preserve it. That's why we have an unemployment problem now and have had a terrible experience.
I think we have an unemployment. No, absolutely
not. A single major
unemployment problem.
Politician proposed a jobs program of the federal government the way it worked so well in the 1930s. You couldn't even have the courage to come up with what was already done. It's been a retreat. The Democratic Party has been a retreat from what it did before. All that AOC and Bernie are trying to do is to bring back the little bit of socialism that the last 75 years of the Democratic Party have been devoted to getting rid of. That's why they're so embarrassed, these political centrists, by the rise of the left. They thought it was over. They had pronounced the death of socialism.
This is unimaginable analysis of political parties today in the United States. I don't think the closed shop policies that Biden are advocating for represent some walk back in policies. Or I don't think that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party push equally or even remotely similarly for the types of economies that they'd like to see today. Whether or not you have problems with how the Democratic Party functions, I don't know if your issues are with the Democratic Party or with the politicians that Americans elect. I know that it's a very popular pastime among lefties to demonize the Democratic Party for not being able to authoritarianly or totalitarianly rule the country, absent the other half of Congress. It seems like a lot of people on the left don't seem to understand how our government functions. I don't know if that includes you or not.
Well,
we're
lucky, though. We have folks like you that will help us.
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Yes.
All right. Well, why don't we move on to the questions?
The thing that I've learned the most today, I'm happy to see that the Democratic Party, under definition 1 of socialism, I guess, is considered at least somewhat of a socialist party of view, as they are believers of enterprise and private capitalists. And I guess
I just spoke against that. How you got out of that? I told you the Democratic Party was not. You started to appeal of government.
You started to appeal to things
All
Democratic
right,
Party.
everybody.
What is
We're all just
happening?
yelling.
100 years back.
We've turned into a Fox News channel. Let's slow down. We're gonna get right to the audience Q&A. Okay. All right, so we have hundreds and hundreds of questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of them. I'm going to try and time both of your responses to about 2 minutes, so I'll give you like a 10 to 15 second warning when you're coming up to that. So the first one is going to you, Destiny. What could convince you that your system or your defense of capitalism is wrong and that socialism is a better path forward?
I think seeing these things tried on a smaller level and then having more success on larger and progressively larger levels would be convincing. The thing that oftentimes troubles me when people advocate for different economic systems is much like Wolff has done and says, maybe in the future he won't say he's done this, but the moralizing of like the relationship between an employee and employer, or the moralizing of different aspects of who owns the means of production or who works in the means of production. I'm not really interested in the relationship between a boss and a worker. What I'm more interested in
there are socialists within the Democratic Party, but I think generally the Democratic Party does not hold to. I don't think any of the initial definitions, like the three pieces of like definitions that Wolff brought up to be called a socialist party.
Are the material conditions of people at the end of the day. If different relationships are more beneficial to growing the economy rather than shrinking the economy but producing a quote-unquote better relationship, I'm more in favor of the former than the latter. I like capitalism because I think that having private enterprise adequately allocates capital into sectors of the economy that desperately need that capital allocated to it. I understand that Wolff is laughing because he's probably going to say something like, oh, well, what about healthcare and education? And I'm so glad that me and the rest of my liberal and even neoliberal friends agree that there are times when the government can step in and it can alleviate some of the problems that the free market doesn't address. For instance, capitalism doesn't solve well for things like healthcare or education, something that we desperately need to realize in the United States as we work to, I guess you could say, socialize those industries, which I'm so glad can happen in a capitalist framework.
All right, Professor Wolff, do you want to respond to any of that, or just get a direct question? If you are going to respond, I'm going to just keep the timing to the 2 minute window.
No, I think this is rehashing stuff we went over. So how about another question?
All right. So for Professor Wolff, were a state to become socialist, how would it thrive within a hostile capitalist world without resorting to the authoritarianism and imperialism of 20th century socialism?
I find this sort of remarkable, these kinds of questions. Imperialism. The imperialism that we study as people who are interested in this topic is a product of capitalism. The subordination of the third world, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, was a subordination organized and operated by capitalist institutions and capitalistically dominated societies. Imperialism, serious issue for sure, but it is a serious issue that is the product and the activity of capitalism. If you would like to talk about things the Soviet Union did and China has done in terms of their activities in and around other countries, and you want to apply the term imperialism, fine. You'd have to make some adjustments because the logic was different and the outcomes were different. And the scale of it was utterly different. We didn't have, the Soviets and the Chinese, at least not yet, have not organized world wars to hold on and to expand their imperialist empires like World Wars I and II. So I find the whole question strange to put forward, especially without any explanation. And now to address briefly.
I don't know. Wait, so I don't know if anything under capitalism is, is capitalism, no matter what, no matter how socialistic it would be. Have we ever had socialism? Ever? Interesting. I don't know. We had like socialist. Well, I wouldn't in that case would like the Soviet Union fall? Wasn't the Soviet Union imperialist? It was, yeah. Wouldn't like the Soviet Union fall with like the Nazis, with it not being capitalist? My bad. With it not being socialist? It had a government that said it was socialist, and they did some things, but they were still within a capitalist framework that they haven't changed like the mode of production. They didn't decommodify their entire market, and they didn't and they still have to do global trade as well. If that's the case, then I guess they weren't really socialist either.
The question,
which I mean, we can talk about that.
What a state that became socialist would do depends on which of the three basic definitions I offered that state embraced. If it believed that socialism was what you have in Western Europe and Scandinavia, that's what it would do. It would have no problem. Excuse me?
Oh, we got 15 seconds left.
Okay. That's what it would do. If it followed the Soviet model, that's what it would do. And if it did the kind of thing that I'm advocating and the socialists like me do, then it would be devoted to changing the organization of enterprises by bringing democracy.
Wolff's, no, the CIA, they're getting him.
Capitalist enterprises.
Okay, to Destiny, do you think that Jeff Bezos works hundreds of thousands of times harder than his workers? Why should he be the richest person in the world?
You don't get compensated based on how hard you work. You get compensated based on the demand for your particular set of skills. There's probably less people that can work in the position that Bezos does, and there are people that can work in any other more entry-level position at Amazon.
Wow.
Okay. Professor.
Wait, do you disagree with that? Do you think just as many people could handle being the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company as could handle being somebody that works in a grocery store or a fast food restaurant? Is there a simple yes or no to that, or am I about to get another lecture?
Well, you don't want an answer. You just want the answer you want. You don't want it in the form that I would
I'm
prefer.
sorry. Can I get an answer that doesn't involve feudalism?
That's not cute. Is that what the point is here?
Okay.
All right, we're going to move on to the
My gosh. I don't know. Hey, listen. We could this is never performative. Nothing. Listen. Wait a second. Do I have this? Do I actually have this? Unironically.
Nothing I do is performative.
There you go. Listen. For one, he does not work hundreds of thousands of times more, and I'm not sure if there's hundreds of thousands of people who, if in the same position, could not. Well, hundreds of thousands of less people could not do the same job that he did. That he does. I don't think we necessarily value it in that way. There's lots of things that go into the wage of a CEO of a company. The stock price does a lot. So in that way, from like the capitalist sort of framework, then he does deserve that much because he got that much, because that's what the framework of our economy says, that's what he will make. In that sense, yes, but like in ethical standpoint, when it comes to the wealth disparity between people, then then that's just too much. In that sense, it's too much, or other people should have more.
next question.
Why don't you just let me respond without coaching me on how to do it?
Okay, I'll give you 2 minutes. I'll go that. We'll go there.
Okay, fine. The idea advanced by you earlier that you don't have one person walk away with $200 billion, roughly the estimate of Bezos' worth.
Richard Wolff living like a socialist every single day, taking his neighbor's Wi-Fi so he doesn't have to pay for his own. Oh no, they started to download a movie from Hulu. Oh shit. Oh no.
And the vast majority of his employees, unable to pay for their kids to go to college, is a distribution of the profits of that business. This
is real. It is real. This is not a deep fake. This is not a meme, as far as I know. Could you imagine if this all came down to like an elaborate deep fake by Destiny and the Surfs, and they come out and they like remove the mask like freaking Scooby-Doo, and then it's someone else? Oh my gosh. Who could it be? Who could be on the other side?
Morally reprehensible. That's how the wealth was accumulated, by the distributions of dividends to shares, share expansion, and share improvement in value. We have a system that rewards one person with $200 billion and another one with $30,000. That's a remarkable decision to make in a community that calls itself democratic, or that likes to believe it wants to give people a fair and equal chance. No fairness here, no equality. It is revolting to me that anyone could find this reasonable. And to explain it by saying there's a demand, that's simply what the corporations give each other, the demand. They're the ones who create the demand, which they then fill with themselves, because they're the ones who hire each other for that job. It's a remarkable self-serving system where the folks at the top give themselves as much as they can get away with. And if it were looked at that way, it would not survive 10 minutes.
Wait, what was the original question?
The original question was that
we were asking how we react to that inequality.
No. The question was why. I asked you, why do you think Bezos is compensated so much more than a frontline employee? Do you think that the demand for those talents is equal between somebody that could be a CEO versus somebody that could work?
I don't think the demand for that talent is an explanation of anything. You'd have to explain why the demand is what it is. Who makes the demand?
Sure, I can. Yeah. We can talk about all of that. I would imagine you as a professor should know the answer to all these questions, right? Where is the demand to running a multi-billion-dollar company that turns profits for people that I mean, like you can explain all of these things. I don't know why you would pretend there's not answers. Very clear.
You can cast whatever aspersions you want on my qualification.
Okay, all right. Let's stick to the audience Q&A. We have a few more to get through. I know it's spirited. I know. Come on.
Getting an actual answer.
All right, Destiny.
It's all moralized. That's all we
Destiny. Let's stick to the Q&A. Okay. All right. The next question, I believe, goes to you, Destiny. If you identify as a SOC Dem, why is it that you did not publicly support Bernie Sanders during his run?
I think that some of what Bernie Sanders advocates for goes in directions that I think would be detrimental to the economy. There were larger policies that he had. I don't know how I feel necessarily about a national jobs guarantee. I definitely don't like the push for like nationwide rent control. These are just certain types of, I don't know if the economy can handle like a 15-hour federal minimum wage at the federal level. There were just a lot of policies that Bernie Sanders pushed for. I think at one point he pushed also for that plan for 20% of every business would be owned by workers. I don't know how the United States would manage that. And then his version of Medicare for all went like more extreme than any other version of socialized healthcare in the world. A lot of these things just pushed it way too far for me. I didn't think they were politically viable. I would have taken Bernie Sanders easily over Donald Trump, or probably a few of the other Democratic candidates, but I just felt like there were better middle grounds than what Bernie Sanders was pushing for.
Okay. To you, Professor Wolff, what is the best way to judge the success of an economic system such as capitalism or socialism?
Well, there are many dimensions, many standards, many metrics that you can use. One of them is economic growth. The other one is the distribution of wealth and income that the society and the economic system generate. For me, I'm committed to asking the question whether the people who do the work, who pour their brain.
I actually found something that's super interesting. Wait, like I said, there's lots of things that go into what makes it. This changes from company to company to, like, you know, place in place. What makes a CEO, where they make their money from necessarily. I found something that was like super interesting. Actually, Jeff Bezos. Okay, guess how much money he actually makes from his like on paper salary. You could take like a wild guess. All right, on like on paper salary from Amazon.com. Incorporated. There's how much money this man actually makes. I promise you, this will like blow you away. Listen, 1 million a year. Well, from his like on paper cash compensation, my man makes $81,000 a year. That's how much he's paid as a CEO. $81,840. And that's just like the base pay cash compensation. So that came from there. None from stock awarded value, none from option awarded value, or non-equity, equity incentive compensation, but $1,600,000 from other. Where does the rest come from? I'm actually unsure. What is other? Well, it's running the world. I'm actually genuinely unsure. I would like to know what the other, the total other came from, because what I would imagine that it came from, 58-1. Ooh, baby. Well, what I would imagine where it came from would be like, well, what my guess would be from the stock value. Like when the stock value goes up, he would get like a portion of that, or like something along those lines. I'm actually completely unsure. I don't know. I'll do some research for you, and if I find out, I'll find out.
Brains and their muscles into the production of goods and services are or are not entitled to participate in deciding how those goods and services are distributed, how the income, if they're sold in markets, is distributed. I would like to see human beings have the right to participate democratically in the workplace. It is at least as important as participating democratically in the residential community where you live. We have the forms in the latter and the complete absence of it. So for me, a test of an economic system would be how much real democratic participation in both work and residential community life people are able to have. And on that ground.
Oh, that's actually super interesting. He's had the exact same pay in 1998 that he had in 2019. The exact same pay. $81,840. And this is the same exact pay he's had since, well, for over 20 years. But the rest of it was paid from stocks. Total compensation was including 1.6 million security services for Bezos. In addition to security, it was so he holds just so much stock. He holds so much stock from being from where he is, that's where a lot of that money came from. Interesting memes.
Capitalism falls so far short that it's an easy choice.
Okay, to Destiny, under the current conditions of...
Actually, that was the same. Actually, that was almost the exact title of that article. It was, what was it? Here, let me see. What was it called? Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos has had the same low salary for decades. A little more than double the average U.S. wage. Wow, Unholy Spike. What's up, bud? Nice to see you again. Thank you so much for the resubscription for 3 whole dang months in a row. I really appreciate that. Low salary.
COVID and everything that's happened, as so many people seem to be suffering and it is stratified people between classes, how can you still defend capitalism?
I don't know.
I believe, sorry,
People-
this one is specifically about the U.S. response. I think that this one is.
Oh yeah, sure. People like to attribute like so many strange ills. I noticed Professor did it earlier when he said our unemployment is very high right now. Like that's a fault of capitalism, and we're just ignoring the worldwide pandemic that's currently occurring. I just there are ways that our government right now can respond to the pandemic that don't require it to be a socialist government. There have been far more left-leaning governments in other countries that have failed to respond to the pandemic. You can look across the entirety of Europe for examples of that, if you wish. I think that these two things are totally disassociated from each other. I think that it is possible to maintain a capitalist economy while also having adequate intervention from the government to alleviate the problems that we have with the pandemic, which we're starting to see under Biden. Unfortunately, it's taken a while, but even under Trump, we saw things like exact and whatnot as well.
Wait, let him keep speaking. He still has a minute left.
Oh no, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt him during my answer. Go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, I would respond in two ways. Number one, the United States has 4% of the world's population and 20% of the world's COVID deaths. For a rich country with a well-developed medical system, that is a systemic failure beyond all words. So for me, yeah, this is a problem of a system that could not prepare itself properly for a pandemic it knows could happen, given the one that we had a century ago, and there are many since that time. And it is likewise a system that was not able to cope very well with what it was unprepared for. The second and final thing I will say is I notice that there are three governments in the world right now: the United States, Brazil, and India, characterized by right-wing governments for most of the time of the pandemic. Trump here, Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Modi in India. Their performances, these three countries, of these three right-wing, super pro-capitalist leaders are among the worst in the world, more than pretty much every place else. And I think that speaks volumes to what's at stake in making this decision between the pro-capitalist and the pro-socialist.
I mean, just to be clear, the
Do you want to
UK,
respond to that?
Italy,
I'll give you a
Belgium.
minute.
I mean, like there are other countries that did worse than the United States, and then comparably, there are countries that also did.
That's an amazing standard.
Wait,
to use
let
for
him
the
finish.
United
Let-
States. There were some that
Yeah,
were
wait, just
worse.
let Destiny finish with his response. We'll do it one at a time, and then we can get a response back. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like if you want to look at like the deaths per 1 million population, like a lot of countries around the world dropped the ball on this. Some did very well, and some of the ones that did very well are capitalist countries. You know, places like South Korea that have like heavily liberalized their economy are bastions of like capital success, have done very, very well when it comes to tracking and dealing with this. You know, Australia and New Zealand are capitalist countries, and they also did very well countering this. Places like the United Kingdom.
Also, poor nations drop the ball. Also, lots of poor nations, they don't have the ability to get the vaccine right now. They don't have the capital. There's lots of trademarks still. My bad. What's it called? Is it trademark? Oh no. The intellectual property of the vaccine is not in public domain, so they can't. Yeah, the patent is still theirs, the companies, so they can't like take what they did, like the mRNA, if I remember correctly, vaccine, and then make their own for their own people. They have to buy it, and if they don't have the money, they can't buy it in the capitalist system, and then they just kind of fucking die.
That has socialized healthcare that provides education for its citizens. They had a worse deaths per million than the United States did. Again, I'm not saying that like hooray, capitalism can save us or any of that stuff. I'm just saying that how your country did, I don't think is necessarily reliant on the organization that you have in your economy. I think it's more important to see what type of action does your government take, which I don't know, maybe Wolff has a definition of socialism where it's also the government coming in and intervening for diseases, but whether you have all worker co-ops or all privately managed firms, I don't see how that matters when it comes to how your country addresses coronavirus.
Do you want a 1 minute response to that, and then we'll move on to the next question? Okay.
Yes. At the beginning of this discussion, Steve rattled off about how socialist societies have never succeeded. So he generally equated the socialism with a success. I try to do that now in terms of the COVID response, and he takes exception. He doesn't want it to be so. He doesn't like the linking of the social system with the problem. Well, you really can't have it both ways. I didn't point out that socialist and capitalist countries had some general difference. I pointed out that the three of the worst examples of mass death happened in societies led by people on the extreme right. That leaves a big open space for the variety of other less extreme situations. That's the point of it all.
10 seconds.
Not that capitalism is the cause of everything, but that it contributes in ways that you can identify and trace.
Okay, question. Wait. Let's move on. Okay, fine. 10 seconds. 10 seconds. Go.
5-second response. I think that you would have an easier time blaming Chernobyl on socialism than you would the coronavirus response on capitalism. That's all I'm saying.
Exactly. That's exactly what you're saying. I see that.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we 2 more questions, gentlemen? Do we have time for that? Is that right?
Got all the time in the world.
Okay. To Professor Wolff, worker cooperatives survive and thrive all over the world by thousands.
All right. I think we can hop out of this. All right. We did it. We survived the debate. And I think even in some points we thrived. That was interesting. I see a lot of people. I do not like how Wolff didn't give like a really defined set of like bullet points for what makes a socialist system a socialist system. That was pretty unfortunate. I feel like Destiny kind of misconstrued some of his points, some of Wolff's points there. I think they really both kind of assumed what the other was thinking, sometimes in a way that was quite cringe, if I say so myself. Did we survive? Maybe not. Who knows? But I don't know. I'm not sure if I could just pin like a straight up winner. I did like the way that I did like a lot of the critiques that that Wolff had for most of the time. Each seemed to have a different goal in the argument. Yeah, they both had a really different goal, and I think that's really one of the big ways it was hard for me to quantify that. Yeah. But yeah, that was it was interesting. I don't even know. I think I'd need some more time to process that before I even give you guys like a definitive like who won, who lost. I'm not sure, but you know what? We'll figure that out. But we made it. We did a thing. I'm so proud of all of you. Oh my gosh.